Welcome back to another edition of Barksdale Bubble. I'm meteorologist Brian Fowler. I am joined today with Chris Nuttall of the National Weather Service here in Shreveport, Louisiana. And welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Being here, coming here from out there towards the airport. The weather's changing. It's getting hot. It's getting humid out there. And of course, wouldn't you know it though, the first day of summer, it's 95 with a heat advisory. And I was talking on the air earlier, never would this happen with fall, where the first day of fall, it's like, 78 degrees and it feels like 70 and it's nice and sunny. No, fall doesn't come until like 2 weeks after fall.
No, not here, not in this part of the country.
No,
we're not that
in
lucky.
December, and summer comes right on time, if not early too.
Yeah.
But of course, we also had during spring, we had spring that was just a gully washer, lots of rain, a ton of rain. And you have all those rivers and streams that start running downhill and into the Arklatex. We had a lot of rain up towards Lake Texoma.
Yeah.
And all of that water has to go somewhere. Just because it fell up there doesn't mean it's going to stay up there. Of course, that's what we're here to talk about today, is that runoff and all that water and the forecasting that goes behind that. Now, Chris is a warning coordinator meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Shreveport. And Chris, how do y'all go about doing that? Because, forecasting rain, you've got rain in the northwest, there's a jet, you've got a trough. That trough is going to carry that rain to the southeast. Not too terribly difficult on that, but forecasting runoff, I was in water resources in college, and just that class alone made you just want to pull your hair out sometimes. You'd have like 4 questions on a final exam.
Why do you think I'm bald?
Yeah, you took several years of water resources classes. May have been the same professor, who knows? But a lot goes into that. A whole lot goes into that. How is that done in the first place?
Well, the first key to all of it is what the rain's hitting. What's the soil type? There's 4 or 5 different soil types that you can have in combination. Is it sand? Is it loam? Sandy loam? And all of, or is it concrete?
Yeah.
And, concrete has no absorption at all. It just runs straight off.
What's the worst soil?
Concrete. Which isn't really soil.
But soil, yeah.
Yeah. But all of them have different absorption properties. They absorb water more than others. The water permeates more, it absorbs farther down into the groundwater system. They also have more, just the capacity to hold water more before then you start getting surface runoff into the rivers and lakes. So that's where it starts. But then when we get to the actual rivers and lakes, we've had, years and decades to study most of the waterways in the area. The Corps of Engineers have, they're constantly going out and using very advanced technology and equipment to map the topography of the river and lake bottoms and the shape of the river and lake channels. So we know exactly what the flow is, and then the floodplains, then all that, how that connects. Is it, wider upstream? Is it narrower upstream? So we can figure out, and then we have all these river gauges that tell us what the flow velocity is of the water. It all starts there.
So y'all take those numbers, I presume, well, as far as you take all that runoff, it's going downhill from, let's say from Texarkana, or even from Broken Bow area of the Red River, and all that water, if we got 5 or 6 inches up there, how do they calculate, okay, we're still gonna be okay down here, or, oh no, the water's gonna be flooding in front of Cyport?
A lot of it, depends on where we are right now. And then how much is it, so then what kind of rise are we going to look at in the future? What are the lakes and rivers like already upstream? Are they going to have to release any additional water because those lakes are getting full, or can they hold that water back and let maybe the water that's fallen into the red kind of run its course, move downstream, and then they release more water and manage it that way? It's all kind of a stair-step effect.
Is it the Army Corps of Engineers that decides to release that, or do they talk to you guys first?
Yeah, no, they manage that, but one of the things is that Shreveport is what they call a control point. So they have to the level of the Red River at Shreveport dictates what they can release at the dams upstream. So what they can release from Texoma, what they can release from Lake of the Pines, Broken Bow, Millwood, Hugo Lake, anything that flows, that's a tributary that then flows direct into the Red. Let's see, Wright Patman also. All of that is based on how it influences the level at Shreveport. But then there's also points, upstream that it's got to travel through. And any flood wave that's coming, or wave of water, the farther it goes downstream, it does what we call attenuates. So the wave kind of will decrease in size and kind of spread out.
Right,
So its effects generally aren't as bad downstream, although that kind of depends too. You get here in Shreveport, the river channel is very narrow. There's been a lot of urban development along the river since 1990. That was one of the things we saw in 2015 with the big flood then. We weren't
expecting that.
Well, we weren't entirely sure how the river would react because, all the development downtown with the casinos and everything else up and downstream, it really narrowed the river channel, eliminated a lot of natural floodplain. So
that was a test, I guess.
So it was kind of a test in 2015. We learned a lot about how the Red River responds right here in the Shreveport area. So, that affects things too. And then anybody that lives in, I know I'm rambling on, but
no,
anybody that lives
I'm
in,
loving this because I've been wondering all this myself too.
And anybody that lives in North Bossier and drives 220 every day probably is wondering, especially if they've lived here since 2015, probably going, man, that water looks awful high compared to where it was in 2015. It's in those pastures and everything, because I live in North Bossier, so I drive it every day. The Red River is a very silty river, very sandy river. It's one of the siltiest rivers in North America. So when it flooded in 2015, 2017, 2016, all of that silt and sand then gets deposited in the floodplain and basically acts as miniature dams, and it kind of reroutes the water in the floodplain into new areas where maybe it didn't quite reach before when the river was at that same level in the past.
And then you have...
but that's a completely natural process too.
Right, and it absolutely, but then you'll have unpredictable problems from that sand being down there in that one area, and it causes the flow to change course or even speed.
But that's all a completely natural process of how rivers respond and change over time.
You can't always, try to control Mother Nature.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult to do that, especially down here where this area used to be a swamp in the first place.
Yeah.
Trying to keep the river from going back to its natural habitat, as it were.
But I mean, just an example of how things can change. I don't know how many people are real familiar with the old river control structure where the Red flows into, the Mississippi and becomes the Atchafalaya down to our southeast. I'm trying to remember when it was they built all that and the spillway down there. And for some reason, the name of the exact spillway down there is slipping my mind. I think it's the Morganza spillway. It's slipping my mind.
Yeah,
they've only opened it like a couple of times in history, but if they hadn't have built that structure, the Mississippi River would actually be flowing west of New Orleans and I think clear west of Baton Rouge by now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just because of the natural change with, floods over times and how the river changes its course with the deposits of sand and silt and sediment and all that.
So one dam has made that much of a difference?
Well, it's a very complicated structure dam structure that they've built down there. That's got, I think it's got 3 or 4 different dams that kind of controls the flow between the Red, and then it's kind of the start of the Atchafalaya River. And then if that's getting too high, they can actually open it and it dumps water into the Mississippi right there too.
How far west do they predict it would have come?
I want to say, I don't know exactly how far west. I know it would have been west of New Orleans is what I've read. And I want to say I read that it would have been west of Baton Rouge too, but I don't know that for a fact.
Okay, so we know it would have possibly kind of meandered over towards the western part of the Delta, or maybe went over the Delta.
I think basically where the Atchafalaya River is now, I think that's where it would have been. Is what I've read.
That would have been interesting to have our own Mississippi River just on our doorstep over here.
Yeah,
that would have been that would have been really interesting.
It's amazing the power of water.
Yeah, it really is. And people think, oh, we've got it under control. Well, a little bit. Yeah, it seems like we do, but look at 2015. That was rough. And I'd spoken to a guy. I don't even remember where I was. I was out somewhere, and this guy had talked about he had just come in from Lake Texoma. And he said, you think that river's up now? You just wait. Lake Texoma, they just released a whole bunch of water, and it's coming this way. And that was, I mean, this guy he goes, it'll be here in about a week, I bet you. And our water was already coming up some, but sure enough, a week later, I don't know who this guy was, but he kind of
that's
he knew what he was
else
talking
the Corps
about.
of Engineers has figured out and mapped out. We generally know water that comes out of Texoma or out of Broken Bow, it'll take X amount of days to reach down to Shreveport. And we have teams of hydrologists that look at all this stuff. And just like we have forecast models for the weather that we look at, forecasting weather, we have water models and river and lake models that they use and run to forecast river and lake heights.
And I believe he even said that the water was coming over the dam up there at that time.
So Texoma has, they have a spillway and a set of turbines, and I know this pretty well. I'm from Oklahoma originally, but every year I go up to Texoma and take a guided fishing trip up there.
Oh, nice.
A couple of times with my dad. But last time I was up there, it was. I was up there about 2 weeks right before it started getting real high. But they have what's called an emergency spillway that's uncontrolled. So when Lake Texoma reaches the top of its flood control pool, it just flows over this spillway. There's no gate. It just flows over it uncontrolled. And it does that as a safety measure for the lake itself. And so, I think it's only gone over the emergency spillway 3 or 4 times in its whole existence. And I think that lake was, and I think that lake's been around since like the 30s or 40s.
Oh,
so,
there's little towns under that lake too, by the way, from a long time ago, which is another story in itself. So the warnings that y'all issue for these rivers and lakes, how do y'all go about that? And are we expecting those river levels to go up any more, or are they starting to subside now? We're not going to have to worry about that for a while again.
So those river and lake flood warnings that we issue, it's all based on the forecast of the stage of the river and lake, how high we think it's going to get. And we've gone out there with survey equipment, just like you see like road surveyors on the side of the road. We will go out there with survey equipment and take height readings, elevation, and figure it all out. So we'll know, okay, if the water reaches, I'll just throw a number out at some river, we know that if the water reaches 16 feet, then it's going to be up in this park that's next to it.
Okay.
And so we know, okay, so that's flooding. And then when it gets to, another 3 or 4 feet higher, this is then getting into these roads and these residences. And then we use all that to determine minor, moderate, major flood stage. And then that's what we base our warnings off of. And the polygons for the flood warnings are based on the floodplain and the areas that are going to be affected. And so a lot of times when you read those warnings, you'll hear or you'll see it say at 13 feet, highway, whatever, will be flooded, and the boat ramp will be flooded, pasture lands will be flooded.
Yeah.
So that's where we figured all that out, where we've gone in and done land surveys.
Pretty close, I guess. So you're able to, you kind of have it down to a science, as it were, of course.
Yeah.
And the rivers right now, it looks like the red is, when I'm reading the river levels, it says, right now the red in Shreveport showing to be in the green, to be in the good category. Right, good category, I guess, but it still looks like it's flooded in some spots.
Well, it's well below flood stage. Flood stage for the Red River at Shreveport is 30 feet.
Right.
What we call action stage is 29 feet. An action stage, anytime you hear that it's an action stage, that's basically like, okay, this is the preparation stage. If it gets any higher, you need to be ready to go if it gets any higher.
Be ready to take some action.
So it's elevated, but it's fine. It's actually still falling. It's going to come up a little bit
I saw that.
here in a few days.
A few tenths.
Yeah, and a lot of that is going to be from some of the lakes upstream that are needing to release some water to, kind of moderate their levels and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. But yeah, the Red River all the way up to Texarkana is good. Every place is below flood stage right now. The areas we're really concerned about in our area right now, the Sabine River is pretty much all of our forecast points along the Sabine River are flooded. I think the Sabine River at Gladewater might be in moderate flood stage. But it's cresting right now and should be coming back down. But the Sabine River, the Natchez River down in Deep East Texas, those rivers come up real quick and tend to be very slow to fall.
Oh,
So
okay.
we'll probably be dealing with them for a little while, unless we get rain here, another, deluge of rain, which
yeah,
not really
tropical.
seeing of that in the next, 7 days or so. Then those rivers and lakes will probably, gradually come down and keep falling, and we should be okay.
So, okay, well, then that's good. So, unless, bar any tropical system,
Right.
Cat 5 coming through here to ruin all of that, we should see the rivers coming back down over the coming days, including Shreveport. It's just like you said, though, and I guess I didn't even think about that, but yeah, they're still releasing water upstream. And that's coming downstream, and that's why the red is still coming up in a few places, such as Shreveport, a few more tenths of it's at 26.5, and it's going to 26.7 or something like that.
Now, the red at Shreveport will never drop below 13 and something. I can't remember. I think it's 13 and a half, but 13 and something. And that's because the Locken Dam's downstream.
Yeah.
So it's always going to be 13, 13 and something or higher.
Okay.
If it ever gets down to 13, that's actually really low for us.
When I first started here, I was driving across the red, and we're going to wrap here in just a second, but where I was driving across the red, and there were people on their four-wheelers down because it was so dry. This was 2012 or 11 or 10, I can't remember. But I was like, wow, I can ride my four-wheeler down there. That's a pretty common looking thing, I guess. And then shortly thereafter, it started building, and really since 2015, it's stayed up healthy. Since I first moved here and it was looking pretty sick, now it's looking healthy, and it's kind of stayed healthy for a while, and I haven't seen it that low again.
Yeah.
What I'm saying.
I've seen some people. I'm pretty sure they put in at Stoner Avenue or on the Bossier side, and boated up to the to the 220 bridge, and I saw them like picnicking and messing around on the sandbar. They had driven their boat up and beached it, and then they were like having lunch out on the sandbar.
Wow. Well, I guess
They're braver than me. I don't know if I'd do that with my boat, but
If
they
you-
were braver than me.
If you have lemons, make lemonade, I guess.
Yeah.
Is what they're doing. I don't know if I would do that. Now, with all those currents out there in flood
I've
waters.
never had my boat on the Red River anyway. I go to the lake,
Yeah,
so they may be more familiar with the red than me.
Too many currents, and I don't want any little friends
Yeah.
getting up in the boat with
Yes,
me either, because
yes.
I'll just give over my boat at that point. Hey,
Yeah.
it's yours, Mr. Snake or Mr. Alligator. I'm going to take a swim now. All right, well, Chris, thank you so much for
Yeah,
being with
thank
us
you.
this morning. We appreciate it. Chris Nuttall, warning coordinator at the National Weather Service. He's a meteorologist over there in Shreveport. That is it for this edition of the Barksdale Bubble. We will see you next time.